Welcome back to Internal Affairs. I'm your host, Dr. Roy Taylor. In this episode, we're going to talk about Graham versus Connor. This is a landmark case from 1989. And what do I mean by landmark? I mean that the Supreme Court came down in 1989 with its ruling on a situation that had occurred in Charlotte, North Carolina. I want to go through the story so that you, as the audience, have a better understanding in future episodes when I talk about the Graham factors or Graham versus Connor. You'll have some background in what happened and why the law is what it is in today's society. Mr. Graham was a diabetic, and one day he was out riding with a friend and felt that he might be going into insulin shock and needed to get some medication, get some orange juice, some candy, something to get his glucose level back up. They pulled into a convenience store rather hurriedly. Mr. Graham ran into the store. He picked some orange juice up, went to the checkout line with several people ahead of him. He felt that he didn't have time to wait, that his blood sugar was dropping that rapidly. He went and put the orange juice back, ran out of the store, got into his car. His friend drove away. Well, this all happened in the presence of a Charlotte Mecklenburg police officer, Officer Connor. Officer Connor felt that this activity that he just observed was suspicious and maybe involved a robbery of the store. He had the dispatch center call the store and ask if everything was okay. In the meantime, he was following the car that Mr. Graham had entered. The store indicated that there was nothing wrong, nothing had occurred. Officer Connor, still believing something was afoot, decides to pull over the vehicle that Mr. Graham was in. Mr. Graham, once the car stopped for the police, he exited the car, ran around at 360 degrees, and then went and laid down in the grass. Very unusual behavior. The officer called for backup when other officers arrived. They picked him up out of the grass, slammed him on the hood of the car, ended up breaking his ankle and bruising him up pretty badly. His friend kept saying that he was a diabetic and he needed to get his sugar level up. Unfortunately, the officers said, "Oh, I've seen diabetics before. This guy's just drunk or high." Eventually, they came to determine that Mr. Graham was having a diabetic reaction and his friend was telling the truth. The officers gave him a ride home, unarrested him, if you will, and left, hoping that their misdeeds would go unnoticed. Unfortunately for them, Mr. Graham filed a complaint with the police department, initiated a civil rights lawsuit because the officers didn't have any reasonable suspicion or probable cause that a crime had occurred or was going to occur. They're basing their observations on their training and experience, is what they would say. This went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States. The Supreme Court came down with what we call the Graham factors. The Graham factors are: one, what is the seriousness of this crime? Well, in Graham's case, there was no crime committed, so there was no seriousness. The second is the person suspected of the crime? Is he resisting? Is he fighting? Is he assaulting? Is he using fighting language toward the officers? In this case, for Mr. Graham, no, he wasn't. And third, was he trying to escape by running or struggling to get away? And in this case, Mr. Graham was not. But this has left us with, again, what's called the Graham factors. And we want to realize that we have to evaluate every situation as a law enforcement officer based on these factors if we're going to use force. And force can be anything from the officer's presence all the way through deadly force. And in another episode, we'll talk more about the factors in each step of the use of force continuum. But in this situation, there was no force used by Mr. Graham. So you can see how somewhat of an overzealous officer caused greater restrictions on the entire law enforcement profession. And this is to the benefit of society. Again, they have to realize, how serious is this case that I'm investigating? Is it a shoplifting or is it a robbery? A big difference between those two things. Is the person fighting me? Is he being aggressive? Is he pointing a weapon at me? Is he threatening me in some manner? Again, that has to be a consideration. And third and finally, is the person running or struggling to resist being arrested? So, as you hear these future episodes and you hear me talking about the Graham factors, you'll have a better understanding of what I'm talking about, as well as an understanding of how we got here. We'll talk about other Supreme Court cases that have affected law enforcement over the years, such as we all know where the Miranda warning come from was Miranda versus Arizona, and that changed how law enforcement officers are allowed to question people. We have Arizona versus Gant, which describes the limits that are placed on law enforcement to do searches of motor vehicles. We have Terry versus Ohio, which tells officers what type of activity is deemed to be suspicious and what types of searches that suspiciousness will allow them to conduct. So you can see there's a lot of different cases that have occurred in the past 35 years that have changed law enforcement greatly. I hope you found this interesting and you'll stay tuned for future episodes of Internal Affairs. Again, I'm your host, Dr. Roy Taylor. Thank you for listening.